I will hand it over to Emma. Welcome to our second top shelf tasting. It's a random mix of very delicious whiskies. There's no real theme to it apart from, I think it was, we called it Pot of Gold because of when we sell it. St.
We
Patrick's
sold it on
Day.
St. Patrick's Day, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all these whiskies are pretty gold as well. I'll just pop the lineup that I've got for everyone into the chat so you know what we're starting out with first and whatnot. I know that they have little caps on them, and you know, sometimes I forget to take the childproof caps off before I get to a tasting. But yeah, no, I'm really excited to do another one of these top shelf tastings. They're probably some of my favorite because it is such a small group and it's people who really geek out about these incredible special whiskeys. And look, it's a bonus that I get to actually try and drink these whiskeys as well. It's definitely a perk of doing these tastings. But yeah, as Ollie said, you know, hopefully you've had like a little bit of an introductory whiskey to ease you into the first one. The Clynelish is obviously quite big and waxy, but yeah, let's get cracking and pour that dram. Get right into it. So obviously, Clynelish is not an unfamiliar distillery name. It's one that we see quite often. It's in the Diageo stable of distilleries, as it were. But when it was founded, it was actually known as like a clearance distillery. There's a couple of different distilleries that were referred to as that. And they were referred to that because landowners were like, well, people live on this land, but I want to make money off of it. So I'm going to clear them off, kick them all out, you know, tear down their homes and put industry on this land instead. So they would build farms, they would build, you know, mines or whatever it is. And one of the businesses that the Duke of Sutherland put on this land was Clynelish Distillery. So he established it back in 1819 and it was not very successful. It was kind of a, we'd probably call them, you know, boss shark kind of people. You know, he very much paid his workers at the distillery in vouchers only redeemable at other businesses he owned on the land. So, you know, not exactly the most ethical business owner. So completely flunked as a distiller. And eventually in the late 1800s, it was sold to a couple of whiskey blenders called Ainsley and Heilbronn is how I'm hoping it's pronounced. But you never know with Scottish names. But speaking of great Scottish names, one of their business partners was called John Risk. And in 1912, he became the sole owner of the distillery. God, what a name. And he actually turned the distillery around. He turned it into one of the most highly sought after single malts in Scotland. And it was actually bottled mostly as a single malt. It wasn't really used for blending too much. You know, which is, you know, quite unusual. People actually wanted to purchase it as a single malt, which was unusual back then before, you know, the 1960s. So eventually it came into the hands of DCL, who we know today now as Diageo. And they did the classic kind of model that we've seen with a lot of distilleries, especially in like the Speyside region, but also in the Highland region. And they did a 2 distilleries in 1. So, you know, you think about Glenlossie and I've blanked the ones we had for Whiskey Sponge. But essentially what they would do is they would open 2 distilleries on the same site, and then they would just name the second distillery Distillery B, you know. So you had the original plant, Clynelish, and then you had Clynelish B. Very inventive. So obviously, rations hit, World War II, World War I, kind of ruined mass production plans, and they ended up closing down Clynelish B. But it was reopened a few years later in 1969 as Brora Distillery, which is obviously a name that probably everyone in this Zoom chat is familiar with, just for its cult status. And it produced a heavily peated spirit for blending. So it wasn't single malt like Clynelish had been kind of, you know, more focused on single malts. It was for blending. They wanted to blend it into Islay whiskies, and obviously Islay is already a naturally a lot of peaty whiskey comes from there, so they had to match that. So Clynelish is a very waxy spirit, very, very kind of different from Brora. If anyone's gotten the chance to taste Brora, it is actually surprisingly a lot lighter, and it doesn't have that waxy quality that regular Clynelish does. And that quality comes from this natural gunk, is the non-scientific term that the distillers use. And they make sure that every time they clean out the still, they scrape the gunk off, clean it out, and then plaster the gunk back on, because that waxy characteristic is so unique to their whiskey. But, obviously you had Clynelish and Brora doing their thing, and then 1983 rolls around and Brora falls to the mass closure of distilleries. Something like over 100 different distilleries closed in that year alone in Scotland. But they kept Clynelish open. Obviously, it was the bigger one. It was more highly sought after for the consumer market. And obviously, since then, they've realized, oh crap, we could be making a lot of money selling Brora because everyone wants Brora now. And so they have rebuilt it, but we probably won't see any single malts from them for a little while. I think they are going to try and really get up that age statement situation as well.
Elysian and Capadonic.
That's it. It was Glenlossie and Capadonic. Is it?
Yeah, and we had Glen Grant as well.
Yeah, Glen Grant did it as well. Yeah. So many distilleries that all mostly ended up closing the second build one. 2 distilleries for the price of 1 situation. But yeah, and obviously this is an independent bottling. This is from Sansa Bar, which is actually one of my, I don't know why I love it so much, but it's one of my favorite independent bottlers. They're a German company that was founded back in 2010, and there's not really a lot known about them. They don't really parade themselves about very much. They're very proud of the fact that they supply a lot of restaurants in the area of Germany that they're based in. But they kind of act like an agent. So we'll talk later on about whiskey blues. But the idea is that you'll have independent bottling companies that also distribute other independent bottlers. So it kind of makes it easier if one guy does, 3 different indie bottlings and distributes them to that region. So Sansibar acts as an importer and distributor for a lot of other independent bottlings in Germany. And for their 10-year anniversary, they sourced an array of really, really cool and special casks. Pretty much all of them were older than 20 years old. And the Springbank that we'll try later on is one of those ones as well for the 10-year anniversary. And they are very highly sought after. And this Clynelish as well. So older Clynelish really gets snapped up in European markets. We saw a couple of years ago that Hidden Spirits did a 30-year-old bottling of Clynelish, and it was reselling 2 weeks later for 6 times the price, and they just go bonkers for it over there. So we were really lucky to obviously get a German IB of Clynelish that is of a good age statement.
So quick story. I jumped on a German website retailer to buy the Sansibar. I wanted to buy all their 10th anniversary bottlings because they just sounded so interesting, and the demand was so crazy. They said limit 1 per person, and we as the Whiskey List been trying to work with this retailer for a bit and exchange some Aussie product for some more interesting European stuff. And he's like, cool. The most one popular in demand is going to be the Springbank. I'm happy the guys give you this, but if you give us some Sullivan's Cove or something in return, we might be able to sneak in the Clynelish or something like that. So I was like, done deal. So we've released some of our Sullivan's Cove stock that we've been holding back for another tasting, just because in the fairness and it's a nice working relationship to get some unique product that is otherwise near impossible to get here in Australia. I know might be available. Yeah, Jose, I was about to say, Paul. With Casa de Vinos is I think it's definitely got the whole range there, but Otherwise, yeah, you kind of have to be fighting with the masses in the European market to get your hands on this. So it's just a pleasure to actually try. And I'm getting a massive punch in the face of like bourbon cask. It's dirty, it's waxy, but it's very much a bourbon cask for me.
Yeah, I've always got, especially with older Clynlishes, it's a terrible sounding tasting note, but I do mean it in the best way possible. You know when you get like a vase of jasmine flowers or something for your house and they smell beautiful, but then after a while they start to go like a little bit soggy and wilty? I find that Clynelish has that like soggy jasmine flowers kind of thing to it, where it's like the freshness is like softly disappearing, but it's being replaced by this like really interesting, like slightly savory funk to it. And that's where that like waxiness comes through on it for me. That's just me. I really like having flowers at home.
I completely agree with you, Dominic. I'm just sitting here enjoying the nose. It's such an appealing whiskey. I imagine all whiskeys had this nose. I know we'd then complain and go, "Oh, it'd get boring," but this is so good. What's everyone else think? Thumbs up so far? All right.
Yeah, pretty special. All right, should crack on to the second one, the Glen Keith.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, awesome. Right. Well, Glen Keith is actually well, I mean, probably not for us here, but they're a relatively unknown distillery. They don't have a core range on the market. They're infrequently seen in Australia, and outside of independent bottlings, the occasional independent bottling, we don't see it, we don't hear about it. It's a blending whiskey, pretty much goes straight into the Shivers blend, as well as 100 Pipers and another blend called Passport. But yeah, they did have a core release once, a 10-year-old, but it was only on the market briefly before they were like, oh, no one's buying this because no one knows who we are. It's actually a relatively, in the scope of Scottish whiskey, it is a new distillery. It is young and fresh. So it was actually constructed in 1957. Seagram's, the Canadian guys, decided they needed another light style single malt distillery to supplement their blends. So they started construction in Keith on a former meal mill, so meal grain for making bread and whatnot. And this mill was actually right behind the Strathisla distillery. So again, close neighbors and all. So when they decided to build it, they decided we're not just going to have this as a distillery. We want it to be more useful than that. So they decided they were going to build their experimentation lab on the site. So this experimentation lab was designed so they could trial and test so many different like methods, processes, just like have a fun time and try and figure out what they wanted to do and, do trial runs and stuff. So at Glen Keith, you've had everything from triple distilled, double distilled, different yeasts, wheat wash, gas fired. It's now steam fired, still peated variants known as Glen Isla. And then like one experiment where like they took peat smoke and then passed it through a water and then used that water in the production of the whiskey. It's got real weird and funky with it. So obviously they had a bit of fun with that. And then, they were like, okay, cool. The need for blends is disappearing. People are still buying our blends, but not in the same quantities that they were. So they mothballed the company in 1999. So obviously mothballed is just closed the doors, wasn't demolished, thankfully. But it didn't actually stay closed for too long. It reopened in 2013, so 14 years later, under the ownership of Pernod Ricard. So that makes this a pre-closure bottle, which is pretty cool. You don't get you don't find too many Glen Keiths on the indie bottling market. And, the moment we're just going through stock of everything that was before the closure. I know I myself bought a bottle of, closed distilleries. This distillery is closed. It'll never open again. 1992 Glen Keith, and then it opened a year later after I bought that bottle. But I still love it. And I think it's such a interesting interesting style of whiskey. It is very much that like light floral, you know, that you see in your Glencadams, that you see in your Glengrants, your Glenlossies, all your Glens. But it's got this core sweetness to it that I think a lot of other Speyside distilleries don't manage to capture. And it's that really juicy, viscous kind of sugar thing to it. And obviously this is a North Star bottling. We are going to talk about North Star a bit later with the Springbank, but it's a bottling for the Elysian Bar. And I know a few of you are very familiar with the Elysian Bar, but for those of you who aren't, obviously it's one of Melbourne's iconic whiskey venues. Opened in Fitzroy in 2016, operated by Ya Wong and Kelvin Lowe, who are incredible people, but also very near and dear friends of mine. And yeah, they styled it after the Japanese cocktail bar scenes. You know, I went to the Elysian before I went to Japan. When I arrived in Japan, I'm like, these boys just copied this, you know? And it's such a beautiful, unique environment. You can see being in a Japanese whiskey bar why they would want to really emulate that. They've won numerous accolades over the last 5 years, and they're absolutely must visit if you have never been. Like, you can't not visit the Elysian if you're in Melbourne. But also, Kelvin is quite a fan of Glen Keith. Every time I've been there, pretty much he's recommended me Glen Keith. So I imagine he had a bit of a hand in picking which of the distilleries that they were going to bottle for their bar birthday. But I'm really glad that they picked this one, because it's just such a, like, it's just so cool, and it really has this mouthfeel that I don't get out of a lot of other whiskeys. And I completely agree with you, Dom, that like barley sugar lolly situation. I've always said, you know, like the Natural Confectionery Company, you know, the white dinosaurs, like that, whatever that flavor is.
White dinosaur flavor.
Yeah, but it's that like gelatin gummy lolly thing to it. And being a massive sweet tooth, of course, I'm obsessed with it. So
just quick hands up in the room. Who's had a Glen Keith before? I imagine we all had at some point.
Oh, Ross, you haven't had one before.
You've this is a terrible one to start on because the bar is now set incredibly high.
You can only be disappointed from here because this is excellent.
I've had a few good signatory vintage ones. They're typically a good Keith. My favorite one prior to this one, which one's that? The Nectar?
There was a 1992 Rest and Be Thankful Glen Keith. I really enjoyed that one. That one was kind of like the little sibling whiskey to this one. But now I'm very upset because now I have to go get a bottle of this because it's really good.
This is insanely good. The last Keith that really knocked me for six was Japanese bottler called Kingsbury. I don't know if it was bottled for Japan. I don't know if they are. Maybe they are. I think they are Japanese. Again, Kelvin got me onto it, and haven't looked back. Everything they do is pretty good on it. A lot of Coelers, but that's every IB plays around with that distillery. Yeah. But yeah, their Glen Keith from memory was like 53.7, which is the opposite of this one. This one's like 57.8. So higher ABV. It's just lollies. It's yeah. That Nectar one, Dominic, is I've had that before at Elysium as well. So yeah, Kelvin has educated many people in Glen Keith, and it's great to actually yeah. I know they've done a couple of tastings as well, so if you guys have jumped on to their ones, great. But yeah, I'm a big fan of it because of Kelvin, and you know, he said, "Do you guys want some bottles?" And I said, "Yeah, let's share it around and put it on the tasting because it's I know their palate's going to be amazing, and two, when do you get to see 28-year-old Glen Keith at such a high ABV? I think it's going to be a winner on specs, and to only just try it and you know, it's better than that."
Yeah. Yeah, what you were saying as well about Kingsbury bottlings, they've got one. They did my favorite Altavine bottling. It was 7-year-old Altavine. It was like 64% ABV, and it just tasted like liquid apricots, and I was obsessed with it. But yeah, like, and this has that like beautiful, like syrupy quality to it. And yeah, I was like debating, do I get myself a bottle of this? Because apologies to everyone, it's a birth year whiskey for me. So I'm pretty sure. So do I?
Treat yourself, Emma.
I really treated myself too much.
It's not fun working for the whiskey list with so many good whiskeys.
It's the worst. I'm like, I want that one and that one. Apricot nectar is cheap. Yes, that is very true.
It reminds me of like lolly fruit salad as a tasting note. I don't know if that works for other people, just a combination of like and the cordial that it's always those little fruit cups of like, that's kind of what I'm getting the vibe.
Yeah, I've just always gotten lollies off of it, but always those like bright note lollies that are like pear or apple or citrus, but it is still that like not quite real fruit flavor. But yeah.
The other good thing about Glen Keith compared to a lot of other distilleries, like in IB world, like we're talking your Lafroigs and stuff, to get a whiskey that's almost 30 years old. This is what, 28 years old. It's 57.8. It retailed 380 from memory. I need to double check my notes, but like that price for almost 30-year-old, Scotch single malt, single barrel is unheard of compared to all the more popular, more cult, like following distilleries. Glen Keith is not as well known. The discovery is yet to be people yet to discover it. So it's a great one to actually jump on the bandwagon and follow. Yeah, I feel sorry for the Springbanks later on, because it's every week it surprises me how intense. But we'll get to that shortly.
Yeah. Well, in that case, if everyone's done quaffing the deliciousness of the Glen Keith, we'll move on to our first of the two Bunnahabhains. So I think Whiskey Blues is number 3. Excellent.
Don't feel like you have to rush. These 20 ml drams are, they'll like put it in your glass, come back to it. We'll get through the tasting in an hour. But yeah, you don't have to rush your whiskeys. All of them will do some benefit in breathing as well. So come back at the end and see how much they've changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the first two, because they're such high ABV whiskies. So I think they'll open up even better. Yeah, Dom, I never finish them as well. I'm like, I'm gonna go back to that and treat myself, and then sometimes I do, sometimes I forget.
I am gonna put the poll up like at every tasting at the end. And with all these polls, you have to pick your favorite. And I think this is going to be the hardest one we've done yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have a feeling which one will be the most popular in the room, but I'm also looking forward to be pleasantly surprised. I'll say it at the end. I don't want to infer bias. That's never fun.
Ollie's had a sneak peek on all of these, but this is my first time trying, so we'll see if I think the same. But yeah, Bunnahabhain, definitely not an uncommon word, a name thrown around whiskey circles, especially in terms of, old and decadent Islay distilleries. Obviously founded in the late 1800s, and it was one of the few unpeated Islay whiskey distilleries. It's located on the Sound of Islay, which they call their Straits Sounds, because the river and the water and it sounds much lovelier than the Bass Strait. Imagine the Bass Sound. That would be cool.
Like the fish.
Yeah, no, like bass, or then people would say bass. It's too confusing. All right, never mind. Forget I said anything. But yeah, so it's on the water. You can see Jura from the distillery, and it was founded with the purpose of blending, like most distilleries are. And it was in the hands of a parent company called Edrington for a very long time. And Edrington used it for Cutty Sark and famous grouse. And Edrington went on to own some small little distilleries you've probably heard of called Macallan and Highland Park and Glenrothes as well. So that's really when people talk about, Bunnahabhain and they use a lot of sherry cask, it comes from that background of being part of Edrington. So that is where a lot of that sherry influence in all of their whiskies comes from. They have obviously done a lot of ex-bourbon cask. The Whiskey Blues one is ex-bourbon, but we often see it in sherry. They didn't have their own single malt until the 1980s, which was a 12-year-old Westering home release, which is still the 12-year-old core release. Can't get rid of it because it is such an iconic bottling and probably one of the best age statement, like entry-level sherry cask whiskies out of Scotland. But this is unpeated, like a lot of their stuff, but obviously their peated expressions are called Moyne, and they started doing them in 1997. So unpeated release at a casual 31 years old. I am convinced that the main reason we have this whiskey on the tasting is because Ollie wanted an excuse to buy a bottle. He tried it at Elysian, I think it was. He was like, I have to. I've got it.
So again, I geek out on the IBs. I'm trying to find IBs that are not available in Australia. 12, 24 months ago, I can't remember when. Found this one called Whiskey Blues, Whiskey Age in Hong Kong. Reached out to them. They don't speak any English. I don't speak any Chinese. We're back and forth in Messenger and WeChat in like Google Translate. It's terrible. We're not getting anywhere. They're thinking I'm trying to sell them. I'm like, I just want to buy your whiskey, and back and forth. And I said, look, I'll get there eventually once travel opens up. In the meantime, someone who might be able to worth having a chat with is the Elysian. At the exact same time, just pure happenstance, Yao was chatting to them from the Elysian Bar, going, hey guys, heard you guys got some interesting whiskey. Can we start importing you? And then I reached out to Yao and Kelvin, and they said, oh, we've only just started. I said, you guys have the connections there. You guys take it, and we'll just buy whatever tasty stuff you guys bring in, because it's they're doing some really cool stuff. And we've done a couple other tastings of the Whiskey Blue and Age prior, but yeah, this one on paper, I was like, I'm definitely keen for a bottle. So yeah, I got to try it in Melbourne a few weeks ago, and Melbourne late last year, November, December, we were there, and I said, let's grab a bottle and put it on a tasting because it needs to be shared with the world. Because this is one of my favorite Bunnas in a long time. It's not a big sherry bomb Bunna. It's light, it's clean, it's classic, it's fruity, it's fun. Reminds me sometimes of a bit of an Irish whiskey, an old Irish Middleton as well. Gets that sweetness, but that's just me.
I was getting a savoriness off of it, like what I would imagine Mongolian fried chicken tastes like. This is like interesting earthy spices.
Paul, we are in chats to them. I know. Dominic Hauser, who bought tickets for tonight, but he's off whiskey. He's having a whiskey-free month. He's the one who got me onto them. And then I said, look, let's just get it into Australia as importing and distributing. And so maybe early days discussions. We're hoping. Whiskey Sponge was a good one to knock off the bat, because we got Highlander in, obviously. Jose's got a few North Stars already looked after with Scott Farrow and the Wonderland Drinks crew. And yeah, so between us and the Elysium and a few of the others, we'll definitely get all these awesome indies in Australia at some point. There's no doubt about it. Just not enough stock, I think, is the biggest challenge for all of them. But yeah.
Yeah, well, and like obviously there's so many independent bottlers coming up and cropping up all of the time, and these guys are like a relatively newish one, 2018, founded in Hong Kong. I love that they almost went on the Scottish model of like they have a food related business and then got into whiskey. So these guys were making ice cream, whiskey infused ice cream. And when I first heard that, I was like, is this a joke? this is a poor translation on Google. What's happening here? No, like they make whiskey ice cream, and then they decided that the whiskey was so good they would just focus on that for a bit. So they did the same thing, like Sansa Bar as well. They act as an agent for a couple of different European independent bottlings in Hong Kong. So they sort Malt Barn at L'Auguste and Whiskey Jury, which I think Don was mentioning that they have, Ben Barrow has here in Australia. Yeah.
They've just landed the latest stock like a week ago. So he won't have much, but it's all sold out overseas. He buys it similar to us. It gets put on a ship for maybe 4 months. It ends up 6 months or 8 months later because of global shipping delays. And then the rest of the world is forgotten about it. You can only buy it on auction. And then Ben turns up with this stock that everyone's forgotten about, like the Ben Nevis and stuff like that. And that is just going gangbusters. So
yeah, absolutely. I'd be interested to see who ends up bringing in, or who is bringing in L'Auguste, because that's a really cool and unusual indie bottling out of France, which is pretty cool. I think I've only tried like a Ben Nevis from them, and it was pretty tasty. I love Ross. I reckon I'll have to rethink my aversion to indies. Yeah, you're missing out.
Ross, just to answer that question, I might I've asked Garth to unmute himself. Sorry for throwing you under the bus, Garth, now, but we had a Lafroig night the other night. We had Face Shield Bottlings, Christian, good to see you, mate, too. A whole stellar lineup. And I think in the top 5, 3 out of the 5 were IBs, right? From memory?
Yes, absolutely. There was an SMWS. There was the Pete's Beast, the 27-year-old. That was amazing. And what was the third? There was something else right up there. One of the original, the 2019 25 was an OB. That was there.
Bessie's Dram.
Bessie's Dram, I think it was just under. Yeah. Oh, well, the hand fill helped too. That was probably up there.
Yeah. So there you go. Like IBs amongst some amazing OBs. That's why we like it, because you get to find some stuff that's just never ever potentially exposed by the distilleries, and someone's managed to throw it in a bottle and put a label on it, and we get to be drinking it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the best part about indies as well is like there's so many distilleries out there that like their core range stuff is not the greatest, shall I say. Heaps of distilleries I can think of that I'm like, I will only touch this as an independent bottling because I know that the spirit is so much better than what they're putting out.
Which one, Emma? Which one? Tell us.
Well, one of my favorites is Fetacan, which is not one we see super often here again. They've got a core range called Fior, and it's fine from what I've heard. But I've tried some independent bottling Fetacans. So the Fior is, quite gentle, fruity, fine. But independently bottled Fetacan showcases this like raspberry and balsamic vinegar flavor palette that is in like all of their spirit, but they just blend it out in their core range. And like it's not super noticeable in their core releases, but it's such a cool flavor.
For me, and I'm happy that ask me any day of the week, it doesn't change. Jura, the OBs don't work with me. I've now had a few IBs. My favorite was the Society one. We've just brought in the whiskey sponge one with the caramel kraken with the little
Richard
joke
Patterson.
of pouring the E150 oil over the pink kraken. I don't have a bottle behind me. It's all been decanted for the tasting coming up soon. But those Juras, like chalk and cheese, completely different with what the distillery puts out, and I don't understand how that's happening. Whilst you drink other IBs like Highland Park, and there are similarities between some of the other releases that are have come out. Doesn't matter. It's just very, very different style. But yeah, I feel like Bowmore unfairly gets a lot of negativity, puts it towards it. But we've I've at least had a few good IBs and OBs and hand fills, and I think they get more slack than I think it deserves sometimes. But yeah, Jura is for me the one that stands out as, I don't know, something about the IBs. Very special whiskey if you get your hands on it. It's not my favorite, but I enjoy drinking it just to see the difference between the two is what I'm trying to say.
When going back to like those Lafroigs, I'm upfront and honest. I don't like Lafroig. I like the core stuff, even like a lot of the IBs that I've tried. I'm like, I just can't drink Lafroig. But I've only ever liked 4 different bottles ever, and like 3 out of those 4 are independent bottlings that were like, this is a Lafroig that I would never try. Yeah, more Lafroig for you guys. Yeah, no, I like the only core range one I ever enjoyed was the discontinued 18-year-old. And like I understand it's a controversial opinion, but I'm just not into it. But I found ones that I did like in IBs, and it was sort of like that was the only way I was ever going to get to enjoy Lafroig as much as other people did. So
Should we jump on the 40-year-old?
I reckon we should. All right, so probably the one everyone's been waiting for as well. Just been delaying the satisfaction.
Been letting it breathe, Emma.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been letting it breathe. Yeah. So this one is super, super duper special. And this is another favorite bottler of mine as well. So obviously I've been through the history of Bunnahabhain and whatnot with the 31-year-old. This is sherry cask, this 40-year-old one. It does have some sherry casking on it. So it is a bit more of that like classic Bunnahabhain flavor profile. But it's part of, don't worry about where it says artist collection, it's artist collective. I realized that today. I was like, wait a minute. So that's our bad. It's artist collective, which is a subset from La Maison du Whisky. Now, if you haven't heard of La Maison du Whisky, they're probably the most famous whiskey shop and bar in France. So they collaborate with local and international contemporary artists to provide the artwork for all of their labels, which is really, really cool. And I think it's supporting a really, not the easiest industry to be in as an artist. And it's really cool that they're getting these incredible, unique labels, and, they're showcasing who the artist is on each of them. I actually have a bottle of their regular series artist collective. I actually have 3 bottles of it, but only one has whiskey in it, just because I like the artwork so much. I like the whiskey as well, but I really love the artwork. But yeah, so specialty French whiskey store founded in 1956 by a lady named Georges Benetta. I've probably butchered that as well. But she wanted to like really cater to the high-end drinker in France of rum, whiskey, cognac, wine, whatever it was. She wanted to provide the drinker with it. So they've since opened stores all over the world, actually. So I think they have 4 stores now, and they have 2 bars. One bar in Paris called Golden Promise, which was their first, and then they opened up their own whiskey bar in Singapore as well. So Singapore is their main international shop and bar, and it's such a really cool company. I got the opportunity to meet Thierry. Jose brought him into Whiskey Now at once, and I got to meet Thierry, and he was so lovely, and he really kind of emulates what the company is about, and it is focusing on lifting up the people who are great at what they do and celebrating, the truly unique, unusual, and special, whiskeys and people. And he invited me to come work a shift at his bar in France, and I'm like, only if you pay. But you know, it's such a really interesting little business, and they make some absolutely incredible bottlings, and really, you know, they are the mecca for whiskey in France. So really cool stuff. But this whiskey smells fantastic. It smells so good. Now,
Because we import Bunna into Australia, I've been trying to get my hands on, because when a customer goes, hey, I want to buy the Bunna 40, how does it taste like? And we can't just crack the bottle open because it's, you know, it's always a challenge. But now we've in our next shipment, which will fingers crossed land any week, any day soon, with the Bunnahabhain 12 cask strength. Slight little plug there, but we are getting some 40-year-old as well. So my plan is to actually put on a tasting with, you know, some of the more higher age statements that are coming, and some of the other interesting bottlings that are coming later this year as well. But yeah, I wanted to try a 40-year-old Bunna that had been bottled through an IB, and yeah, this one happened to come up in, you know, my searchings in Europe again, and I said might as well throw it onto a tasting. But yeah, on specs, 46.7% refill sherry, but you know, La Maison de Whiskey, you know, it's a no-brainer for me. And then that's just on specs. I've never tried this whiskey yet. This is the first time just nosing it right now. I'm ready. It's winning for me.
I will say as well, so it's a bit of an oddity with La Maison de Whiskey. So they're like numbers series. So this is number 9, obviously, in their artist collective series, the special ones that are older and rarer. This whiskey is probably actually older than 40 years. I have been informed that they prefer to round it to the nearest 5 digit, which is weird. But I tried a Ben Nevis that was I think it was 35 years old, and they're like, yeah, it's actually 37, but they thought 35 looked nicer, so they just put 35 on it. So it could be airing a little bit higher than 40. I cannot confirm, but it is a weird quirk that they do with these releases. This is, I will admit, not the first Bunnahabhain 40-year-old I've tried. I've actually not tried the core range one because they're hoarding it all up in Sydney. Looking at you, Wally. But I actually got to try a Massam Samaroli 40-year-old. And I have to say, I think Bunnahabhain over the age of like 38 starts to taste like cured meats. And I'm into that. Because that last 40-year-old that I tried tasted like mortadella ham. And this tastes like wild boar salami. And I'm so into it. It's got that like salty, savory, but sweet thing to it.
I'm Polish. We grew up on deli meat, so this is definitely my jam. I'm getting a hint of nail polish on the nose, in amongst some other spice. Yeah, that there's chocolate notes, nutmeg, even cloves. But there's the acetone's sneaking through. Is that just hints of its age?
Maybe. I don't know. To me, obviously I've had my nails done before. It's more like the powder that's like they set hard. It's called SNS powder. It's like, yeah, it's that like weird, not quite chemically, but still a bit chemically. Yeah.
I'll open up the floor.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to share their thoughts on it, go for it. Put your hand up and I'll unmute you. Paul, what are you thinking?
There we go. Lovely stuff. Yeah, I've never had a bad artist series release. I try and grab as many as I can when they pop up in Australia. This one's no exception. It's a great dram. You get quite a lot of coffee on the palate, like instant coffee kind of thing.
Yeah, that like metallic gritty thing. Yeah. Like you said, get the Caolila next, please. I've got the Caolila 7-year-old with the rainbow eye. That's the bottle that I bought literally for the artwork. And then I took the empty bottle from Whiskey and Almond and the empty bottle from Boilermaker House.
Nice. I think there's a 40-year-old floating around for about $3,500 at the moment. So
I think so. It's funny, but really old Clynelish is spectacular.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yes, and who's selling that 3.5 bottle Clynelish? Because maybe that's the next top shelf. Dominic, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, as Paul said, these are sort of exceptional drops at the moment. What I can't get over is actually having nosed the 40-year-old, the 31-year-old almost disappears when you go back to it on the nose after doing that 40-year-old. I mean, I think the 40-year-old's nose. I mean, I'm one of those drinkers who can actually spend just as much time nosing these things rather than actually drinking them. I get a lot of pleasure out of the nose of these amazing whiskies, and not a single one of these first 4 has let us down at all in terms of their noses. They've just been stunning, absolutely stunning. So, yeah, well done, guys. Great collection, and looking forward to the last 2.
Yeah, great. Ross.
And the cage fight with Paul.
Great. Ross, you got some words to share on the Bunna so far?
Yeah, I love the 40, mate. I really do. Problem is with my nose, I had it smashed up as a kid. I had a piece of wire go through it and smashed it into a fence. So I've always had trouble smelling. So when I do, I've got to keep my mouth open, and that's the only way I sort of get a half taste and a half smell. So I've always had trouble with that, but this is just deluxe.
I'm the idiot teenager who rolled his quad bike and smashed up his face, and one nostril is better. And long story short, I need to get the nose straightened up, but I can definitely, that's why I'm always like on an angle. It works. Wear a helmet is the value.
Yes.
I was too young, mate. I was only 5.
Yeah.
Wear a helmet and drink a lot of milk, because I've never broken anything in my body, and I drink a whole bunch of milk every day.
Christian, what's I know you're a critic of Bunnas. Yay or nay?
Are we on the 40 now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big beast of a Bunna. I like it. I like the 31, but I prefer the 40.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even going back and nosing the 31 now, it smells like when you get buffalo wings at a proper American restaurant with ranch and celery, it smells like that plate that arrives in front of you. It's like celery and ranch and a little bit of dill spice, and so interesting. It's giving me definitely some nostalgia vibes from being in the South.
All right. Springbank time.
Springbank time.
Again, don't rush your whiskies. I'm going to leave some to the end and go back to them all. But yeah,
I've got an extra special other whiskey that Ollie left me to try afterwards, so I'm saving myself for that one as well. It's a Lecheg. Because of course it is. It's always a Lecheg with me.
Is that the 10-year-old?
Yeah, the Black Corby. Yep.
It's not on the same class of these whiskies. It's fine.
Look, it's Lecheg. I love it either way. All right. Okie dokie. So the IaaS Springbank 21-year-old North Star is whiskey number 5. I don't know how to count already.
Wait, quick question. Are we doing this because one's lighter than the other, or is there method to madness here?
Yeah, one's a slightly higher ABV, and the Sansibar looks sherry casked. So I'm going to say we go on the lighter one first, and then move our way into the sherry cask.
Everyone's cool with that approach?
Yep.
Cool. Thumbs up. We don't know. Well, I haven't tried these either, so we're going in blind.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You kind of just have to look at the specs, and you're like, okay, well, I think, I mean, honestly, if you give me the specs of the Bunna 40 and the 31, I would have swapped them around and completely messed up all of our palates, just based on, you know, history and stuff like that. But I'm glad we did it in the age way. But yeah, so Springbank, probably what most of you are most excited about on this tasting. So this release was bottled for the Springbank Obsessed Facebook group. It's all about Springbank, and not, in fact, a cloud computing infrastructure company. So Springbank's obviously one of the most highly sought after whiskies in Scotland nowadays. Their business model has never been to grow or expand in the way that like a lot of other distilleries have done. As soon as they become, you know, start to pick up commercially, they still produce whiskey. Everything is done on site, from the malting, peating, obviously distilling, maturing, bottling. Everything is done on site. So it's very, very traditional. They even write their distillation runs on a chalkboard. So you could easily go and ruin their entire week with a slight rub of the hand. But yeah, they're very, very old fashioned. And that kind of, you know, that taking their time to produce everything. They do a 4-day ferment. So they finish work on Thursday and then they come back on Monday or Tuesday. They all wanted to give themselves a few extra days on the weekend. But yeah, because of that, there's not as much production of these whiskies as you get from other bigger distilleries, or, you know, distilleries that have fully mechanized the whole process, you know, which isn't a bad thing, but they are very traditional. They're also a very conscious distillery, you know, socially conscious distillery. They do work experience programs for the local high school students. So they have a few places and they hire a few kids every year so that they get experience working in a distillery. And then when they eventually want to leave Campbelltown, because there's not a lot of industry there, they then have that experience to go and work at another distillery, which I think is really cool. You know, they are, you know, being as much of a responsible business within their community as possible. They've got 2 independent bottling companies that they own. So J&A Mitchell, which is probably in the name you see on Green Spot bottles, because I, you know, contract that out. And Cadenheads, obviously, is the most well-known one. And what some people may or may not know is some of the money from Cadenheads actually goes to building local infrastructure in Campbelltown. So I think a couple of years back, they built a playground that they didn't have before in the local community. So it's kind of like hard not to love them even more for what they're doing outside of the whiskey that they make. But also, obviously, the whiskey that they make is spectacular. So Springbank is their lightly peated. It's 1 shovel of dry peat is all that goes into the malting process, and it's no more scientific than that. But yeah, it's a really, really great distillery, kind of the biggest one in Campbelltown. They also run Glengyle Distillery as well, of course, where they make Kilkerran, which is also very hard to get your hands on, considering they only operate 3 months out of the year. But yeah, outside of Springbank as a distillery, this is bottled by North Star. So now I'll go a bit into, you know, what North Star is.
Quick question, Emma, because Campbelltown at some point was like the most populous in terms
32 distilleries closed down, I believe it was. Oh, there was nearly 40 distilleries in Campbelltown. And then with the introduction of the railroad taking barley elsewhere and people no longer using the port in Campbelltown, it pretty much just drove all business out of Campbelltown. So
we got Glengyle, Scotia,
yeah, Scotia, Springbank,
and then Ian's recent one, which you're about to get to, I mentioned.
That one I don't know too much about. I'm more familiar with Ian's North Star independent bottlings and stuff like that. So obviously he started in Glasgow, so not super close to Campbelltown. But he wanted to focus on really odd and obscure whiskies when he was bottling. And you'll still find that he bottles a lot of, you don't get too many independent bottlers that do blended and blended malt whiskies, but North Star is one of them. And I think that's really great because they get so overlooked. And, blended whiskies are really cool. The core ones that you can buy at like your local bottle shop, maybe not so much. But independent blended whiskies are super, super cool and really need to get more love, I think. Plus, you can get some really old ones that are pretty special. North Star did the Vega 40-year-old blended malt, which was exceptional. But they have also started doing the Mac series, which is predominantly sherry cask blended malt whiskey. So on each of his bottles, apart from the blends, he tries to be as transparent as possible. So cask, age, bottles produced, natural cask strength, and then he gives little tasting notes on the side. Some of the tasting notes are serious. Some of them, I've found some bottles that are just an absolute hoot, like Not Your Mama's Jambalaya, which was a very interesting flavor note. But he actually bottles quite a lot of Springbank whiskies. He was an admin on the It's All About Springbank group, but he stepped back on that because he's got other business ventures going on, which I think Ollie might delve deeper into on this.
I was just looking for an image. So he started North Star to basically fund his future dreams of getting Campbelltown back into a powerhouse region. And then, he's launched South Star. There's rumors that he might do an East Star for the Asian market. I think he teased us at the recent Oak Barrel tasting with that. And then what else did he say? That I said if there's going to be a West Star, and he goes, there's no need for that because there's too much Western distilleries anyways. But he started the distillery just announced a few months ago called Del Riata. Let me quickly share my screen. Hopefully everyone's seen it. But awesome glass panel, three sides of it, basically distillery overlooking the water there. So I just done some quick Googling of what it may look like, but you can see pictures of this is a video. All right. But you get the point basically. Amazing giant distillery, lots of glass. So they're that's always been his dream, and selling whiskey as an IB is fun and all, but making it yourself is where he's always wanted to go. He's obviously had a big passion involvement. He lives in Campbelltown, loves his Springbank whiskey, and then this is his last official IaaS North Star bottling. He might do one in the future. At the moment, he said no because North Star, he's just going to focus on the distillery now, and he probably won't get his hands on any more Springbank casks for the group. But IaaS has done bottlings through all kinds of retailers, bottlers, IBs, private collectors. It's gone gangbusters. Every year it's just tripled in demand. I don't know if anyone else here in the group has had a few. But Ronnie, good point, Dominic. Ronnie, who started IaaS, is one of the partners of the distillery, and they've got another guy as well who sold his IB, I believe, to another whiskey group as well in Scotland. So they're all well funded. They're going to throw a bunch of money in, and they're going to make some great whiskey that hopefully competes for Springbank is their goal. So it'll be good to see what comes out of them in a few years. But what does everyone think of the Springbank?
Love to hear everyone's tasting notes, because as soon as I smelt it, all I could think of was Szechuan seasoning. I feel like, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like the last couple of whiskeys have been so savory. I'm very into it.
So Paul.
Yeah, we had a similar problem with a Springbank tasting a couple of weeks back with another friend of ours. I don't know, the bourbon older Springbanks, the nose is amazing, but the palate just kind of drops away. So I don't know, it's an ABV thing, or it's because we've come after that, crazy bunner. The nose I love, but the palate, I poured a Springbank 10 like 2019 bottling on the side, and the palate on that was I got way more flavor from that compared to this.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think it just needs more time, right?
Yeah, it might be one of those things. Like, you never know. And especially like I see what you mean. It's got this kind of like papery parchment thinness on the palate. But yeah, I don't know. I always find like I've always said, for me, Springbank has like roast chicken vibes to it. And so I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting that onto myself. I see what you mean. I like it, but I'm not like I need to go out and get a bottle of this, if that makes sense. Not that I could, but if I wanted to.
Dominic, Mike, what do you guys think? Ross, thumbs up, thumbs down? Ross likes it.
Ross is into it. Dom's into it. Nice. Yeah, it is tasty, and it's one of those things as well. It's like, what is 45.2% ABV, natural cask strength. It's the nose is definitely fantastic. Might be one of those ones you have to go back with a clean palate after. Not gonna lie, I thought that Bunnahabhain was not gonna be as big and bold and chunky as it was.
So we bottle these. So crack the bottle, pours it straight into the little sample bottles, so seal it up again. So they don't have much time to breathe in that process at all. We're not shaking the bottles, we're not decanting it, we're not letting it sit and breathe for a bit. It's just out of the bottle straight into the sample kits. So this one might need more time, like weeks, months. Drink the neck pour and then come back to it.
And going back to that nose, it smells like salt and pepper squid.
And yeah, I agree with you, Dominic, following that 40-year-old Bunna.
Yeah, that's the thing, when obviously I didn't get the chance to try any of these before, but you're like, oh, an unpeated 40-year-old Bunnahabhain and whatnot, it's not going to be, super funky chunky. And then you're like, Springbank is peated. So, again, a lot of how I try and order things is based on specs. And sometimes whiskeys just throw you a curveball and you're like, oh my God, I did not expect that. But yeah, I'm definitely saving some of this for later. It'll be good to go back to it again.
Curious to hear what Paul Field thinks, if you're on, mate, still. Can't see your face, but I've...
Yeah, I'm here. I completely agree. It's basically overshadowed, I think, by that massive bunner. It tastes like, Paul Leyland was talking about the Springbank 10, and I think it tastes very, it's been a while since I had a Springbank 10, but it tastes very similar to what I remember a Springbank 10 tasting like, which is like really crazy considering, the age difference and everything.
Yeah. I absolutely agree.
Maybe we all should go grab some crackers or corn chips or something and reset the palates.
Plain wafer crackers only.
See, Christian and Garth are doing the Boilermakers, so maybe they've
look at that.
They've got the right idea there.
We're just cleansing the palate, Christian. That's all. Not a Boilermaker. It's to make sure that we're fresh for the next one. You know us, sensible.
What's the view on this Springer? There we go.
We're putting it to the side to give it more air, and we're going to go on to the last one first. So we're reserving judgment for a moment.
All right. Fair call.
Nose is good.
The nose was good, but on first taste it was a bit overshadowed by the bunner, so we're going to come back.
Sounds good.
Last one, Emma.
Last one. So Springbank 1996 24-year-old Sansibar. Now, this one I'm very excited about. So again, this was bottled for the 10th anniversary of Sansibar and the brand and the company. I've been through Springbank, and I've been through, the little history behind what we know of Sansibar. I do highly recommend, trying more Sansibar whiskeys. They don't, obviously get to Australia too often. Jose brings them in when he can and gets the opportunity to. But they're pretty cool. My first ever Sansibar was a Tobermory, so I feel very biased towards both of those things, obviously. But yeah, they bottle some really cool and very interesting stuff. And obviously the German palate towards whiskey is very different from a lot of other countries like Hong Kong or France or, even Scotland and Australia. So I think that they always, tend to go a bit, I don't know if you guys have seen much Blackadder independent bottling stuff. He's a German guy. He goes balls to the wall, crazy, cool, weird, leaves the charcoal from the barrel in. And I feel like a lot of other German indie bottlers have a similar kind of attitude towards picking whiskies. And so when I saw that this was on, I was very excited about it. Yeah, Paul, that guy is nuts. Apparently, Brooke and Jules saw him at a whiskey event in Rotterdam years ago, and he was just wearing the most ludicrous, like, multicolored suit situation. And they were like, who is that? And they're like, oh, he owns Blackadder. They're like, okay, no, fair, that makes sense. All right, cool. But yeah, so
Emma, we've it's 48.9%, 24 years old, distilled 96, bottled in 2020, sherry cask with a Madeira cask finish.
Yep.
So sherry on sherry on sherry, basically.
Just a touch of sherry. Yeah. That Madeira cask really comes through. It's not often you see a Madeira cask like overtake classic sherry ones. Yeah. See, Dom, you need the sherry to blow off on this. I'm loving it. I'm living for the high ABV fortified wine that this glass is.
Well, congratulations to the team at Sansibar for 10 years, because I can't imagine what they're going to bottle for 20-year anniversary. This is the quality already. So,
Yeah, and you think about how stellar that Clynelish was as well.
now I want the rest of the series. So,
Forbidden collection. You'll spend your whole life tracking it down. Yeah, deep pockets full. Yeah, it's like when I tried to see how many of the E-Spirits Liquid Treasures 10th anniversary bottles I could get. Turns out one. I could afford one.
this is a fun time in a glass.
It's not as savory as one might anticipate a Springbank to be in that many sherry casks, because often it does go that like savory route because that slight peat, but oof.
I've had some Springbanks that are like charcoal black in color. They're 20 plus years old and they're just over oaked. And people buy it because it's the color and the brand name on the label, and that's it. And I'm like, let's go back to the basics. Like, why are we buying whiskey to drink it, to enjoy the flavors? And I think there's some balance between spirit and flavors here. It's very wood finish forward, but on multiple sips you get a little bit back. Christian, you're kind of come back with what's the critique there?
What was the question?
What do you think of it?
I was just rambling on about I still get a little bit of spirit on this. It's not all wood finish for me, so
There's a lot of cask, that's for sure. Yeah, we're discussing going back to the previous Springbank, and yeah, they're very, very, very different. But Not sure I prefer this over the other one.
Mm. Yeah, I can totally see that. I think that this is like erring on that. There was a Craig Alecky I had a couple years back, bottled by Battle Hill, and that one was gone too far for me. It just tasted like beef stock cubes, and for me, this is like going in that savory direction, but it's not quite savory enough that it's like committed. So I'm into it, but like it's one of those things. This is a Miranda whiskey. This is something Miranda for Whiskey and Ailment would absolutely froth over. So.
From Sullivan's Cove.
Well, from Sullivan's Cove now, yeah. I can. Hopefully we'll see her when we're down there later this month. So yeah.
This is a lot of umami for me.
Yeah, I think Dom's called it with the sulfur hounds having an issue. It is that like sulfurous, but it's spirit. It's spirit sulfur, not cask sulfur. So
Finish is good. I was going to be judgmental and go it was too short for me, but now it's longer than I was expecting.
Yeah. But Paul's saying bourbon cask stringers are the best.
So I had to check. It's 90.96 out of 100 on whiskey base with 32 votes on this Springbank right now. So a decent amount. I wouldn't put it at a 90. Personally. I think there are better Springbanks out there. It's good.
Yeah. I'll agree.
But there is a lot of sherry lovers on that website. I am going to chuck the poll up because it's always curious to get some feedback. So click away. Chuck in your second and your favorites if you want into the chat. But yeah, let us know which one's your favorite of the night. Emma, your favorite, because there's a lot of whiskies here I think you enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard. So many good ones. I mean, I think I'd have to go back to it, but I feel like I'm leaning a bit towards the Glen Keith. But then the Bunnahabhain 40-year-old was also awesome. Yeah, I think for me, it's a toss-up between those two, just because they're like two completely different sides of the whiskey coin, as it were. You know, like you've got the savory-ish, like savory salami sherried Bunnahabhain 40, and then you've got the bright lolly Glen Keith. So yeah, you can't decide. But yeah, they were all pretty spectacular.
Bob and Jacob, are you guys there? You guys want to chime in with your any favorites of the night? Or just lurking in the shadows?
I think we got some lurkers playing in the background.
I think Jacob was summoned to work or something, so he's kind of listening in the background. He's just texted me, "Leave me alone, I'm a shadow tonight."
They're pulling on me when I'm at a online uni Zoom lecture. I'm like, I'm there, but I'm not really there. Yeah.
I'm very surprised by the Clynelish. I knew the Keith was going to be good. See you, Dominic, if you got to run.
Cheers, Dom. It's good to see you.
Hold on, you can all unmute yourselves now. I think we get to the end. More casual chat if you want. There we go. So yeah, the Clynelish, big surprise for me. I think the 21-year-old Springbank North Star by itself, not in this tasting, I think would have done better.
Mm.
The Bunna 40 outshine the 31 completely. And this last Springbank here, I don't know. Between the Clynelish and the Keith for me personally, even though as much as I like the Bunna, I would drink more of the Clynelish and the Keith, I think, just because they're so different. They're interesting.
Yeah. You want to
Yeah,
share
we
the
can-
results, Ollie?
Yeah, let's
Pretty
do it.
overwhelming.
Here we go.
Da-da-da. Everyone liked the Bunna 40. Yeah. I think there's something special about a whiskey that can still hold up after 40 years in a barrel. Like, you know, I've tried 29-year-old whiskeys that were not good, and treated the exact same way as this Bunnahabhain was, and at 29 years they were just kaput. So yeah, that's pretty special. I will say, if anyone hasn't gone back to nose the Clynelish, it smells like a candle store. It's beautiful. It's just so aromatic and like fresh and oof, so good.
Just going to pause the recording, wave goodnight as the official part of the tasting, and then we can have a bit of a casual chat afterwards. But yeah, for those watching the recording later on, hope you enjoyed the tasting, and let us know your feedback as well once you get to the kits, and we'll see you at the next top shelf.
Absolutely.